Hi, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Desire Wellness session with Nurse Practitioner Deidre Arms with DesireWellnessGroup.com out of Ohio. She is talking this week about fats. We always get questions about good fats, bad fats. You have the Dean Ornish diet for reversing cardiovascular disease, and he says, no, stay away, no fats, no more, don't do it. Well, at least originally he did. And he's since kind of backed off just a little bit to say, maybe a little bit of avocado is good. Maybe a little bit of olive oil is good, but it depends on the olive oil. So in order to break it all down for us and disseminate between the good fats and the bad fats, the good, the bad, the ugly, we have Nurse Practitioner Deidre Arms that's here. Deidre, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you tackling this really tough topic.
You're welcome.
So where should we start? How about what are the different types of fats that are out there? Let's start there.
Okay, so we have four main fats: your saturated, your trans fats, your monosaturated, and your polyunsaturated fats. All of those are kind of a mouthful, right? But I'll tell you a little bit about the difference of them. Saturated fats are mostly found in animal products. So think of your butter, cheeses, and meats. Some of them are plant oils like coconut or palm oil. And then trans fat, those are mostly man-made. They're found in processed foods, baked goods, margarine, and I'm sure you're going to know I'm going to say these are very harmful. So trans fats are not good. The monosaturated fats, though, that's found in your olive oil, your avocado, and some nuts. So that's a much better fat to be having. And your polyunsaturated fats are found in fish, flaxseed, walnuts, sunflower. And this group, the polyunsaturated fats, include your omega-3 and your omega-6 fatty acids. And we'll get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about the sources of each fat.
So for the saturated fats, we see that in red meat, butter, cheese, coconut oil. So typically we say, right, limit those. You've probably heard that from your providers before. The trans fat in your fried foods, your baked goods, your snack foods, your margarines. So we usually say avoid those. Monosaturated olive oil, avocados, almonds, peanuts, and those polyunsaturated would be salmon, flaxseed, walnuts, sunflower. So just looking or talking about what we just talked about here, which ones do you think, would be better for cardiovascular and peripheral arterial?
Oh, that's a good question. Should we open it up to our studio audience and see if anyone wants to take a guess at that? I can see Douglas already ready to step in. Douglas, which types of fats do you think would be of benefit to people with peripheral artery disease? Go ahead and unmute.
When she said that, my mind went in a spin because I went shopping yesterday and it was trying to find. You read the labels on the back of the products and it's just all over the place. And my first thought was, which fat do I do with my sodium and my protein and my sugars and all of that? Does that make sense? Because it's like all over the place. If I get too much trans fat, then I don't have, or like rice. If I get too much sodium, it does this way. Am I making sense to you?
Right. And so you're thinking which one would be better for you, and that would be looking at the polyunsaturated fats because you're getting your omega-3 and omega-6, which is hugely anti-inflammatory, and then your monounsaturated because that's coming from the olive oils, avocados, and some nuts. Those are the best two. If you can avoid trans fats, that's optimal. And it's really hard when you're getting foods that have a lot of labels. Well, the trans fats, they disclose that, but those are the ones we need to stay away from the most, those ultra processed foods.
Yeah, those can end up, oxidizing those LDL particles and causing them to wreak havoc in your arteries. So, as you said, stay away from anything that says trans fat as much as you can. And if you can is it possible to completely eliminate trans fats? I mean, it's pretty much in packaged foods, like processed foods, right?
Right. And so those ultra processed, you're packaged, things like that. So cooking more at home, you avoid that. Using the olive oils, eating fish, nuts, things like that. The less processed, the easier it is to stay away from trans fat.
I
Yeah.
have one more.
And we're just talking about the good, which ones are good for you and which ones are bad for you, Douglas. If it's a question, we can get to it a little bit later. We want to go into how does fat actually now affect cholesterol?
Okay.
Because
So,
that's really the important thing. That's what I was talking about with the trans fats. Trans
mhm,
fats, right, can oxidize those small LDL particles that end up eking into the artery wall and pushing it out and restricting blood flow.
exactly. And so the different types of fats have different roles on your cholesterol level or effects on cholesterol. Saturated fats can raise the LDL, that's your bad cholesterol levels, and that can increase the risk of cardiovascular. Your trans fat can raise LDL also, but it can lower your HDL, which is your good. So that's even more harmful than a saturated fat. The monounsaturated fats, they can help lower LDL levels and they may raise cholesterol, the HDL, which that can be beneficial. So you get a better profile there. And then that polyunsaturated, that can lower the LDL as well. And it can have other heart healthy benefits because of that omega-3 fatty acids that's in the polyunsaturated.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so important to know. So, got a question though. This is a weird one, because I can't seem to get a straight answer out of some doctors. What is the positive purpose of LDL? Because all we talk about is get those LDLs as low as possible. They're horrible. They're dump trucks inside your arteries. There has to be a purpose though. If they're in your body, there has to be some good things or a good service that these LDL particles provide.
Yeah, LDL isn't all bad, right? It's an essential role in the body. It carries cholesterol to the cells that's needed to basically repair the membrane, producing your hormones and other vital functions. So cholesterol is really important for hormone function as well. But too much of it in the bloodstream then leads to plaque buildup and in the arteries and everything. So
And you had mentioned that, and I had even mentioned about the LDL particles, and I just want to reiterate this because I think it's so important, and I'm going to let you actually, state it again, but just I'll formulate a question around it. Do LDL particles get oxidized by trans fats, saturated fats, and free radicals?
yes, the answer is yes in short, and let's go into a little bit of that. So LDL particles, they can get oxidized by those free radicals, right? And those are unstable molecules. We talked about that in another episode that can damage the cell, right? So when LDL is oxidized, it becomes more likely to cause inflammation and plaque buildup in the artery. And that's not what we want, right? We don't want inflammation in there because that leading up to plaque and making it much easier to have like an obstruction in the artery with full plaque buildup with inflammation causing that as well.
What does it mean that the LDL gets oxidized?
Um, Oxidation of LDL, really like the free radicals causing it to become unstable. Yes, it just becomes unstable. They're damaging the cell when it's oxidized.
Okay, so what about the debate over, I mentioned this in the beginning, avocado oil and coconut milk and even coconut oil? Are they good? Are they bad? I mean, I just don't understand. I just saw a Gundry video, Dr. Gundry, and he was talking about, okay, the top three oils. Okay, number three was avocado. Then number two was coconut oil. And then number one, of course, was olive oil. But are should we be concerned in using avocado oil and coconut oil? Because then I've seen studies or reports that show that coconut oil is absolutely 100% stay away from it. But I use it when I'm making my desserts. You know, if I want to put a little raw cacao in some coconut oil with a little bit of agave syrup, and I heat it up, and then it, you know, is like a magic shell over and creates dark chocolate covered, you know, frozen strawberries. And it's an alternative dessert for me because I can't have any sort of dairy. And I don't do regular sugar for the most part. So am I in trouble?
So, well, with the avocado oil, generally is considered healthy, right? Because it's high in that monounsaturated fat, and
Okay.
that can lower the LDL level and reduce the risk of cardiovascular. And then when we get into like coconut milk, it contains saturated fats, but it's different from the saturated fats found in animal products. So there is some differences there, and the research suggests that it can have natural or even beneficial effects on, if in moderation. It doesn't sound like you're snacking hugely, so, but it would be
Just want to
consumed
make
in
sure it doesn't
small
cause
amounts, right?
inflammation. Yeah.
Yeah, so small amounts of that would be considered okay because, you know, it's
Right.
not like the saturated fat found in meat. And I feel like that's the thing, is balancing out things. It's really hard to be no to everything, right? No to all the things. And so when no is not the option, you know, we can't stay away from certain things. What's the healthiest route we can go?
But I imagine sticking as much as you can to olive oil is really your best.
You know, we love olive oil, right? Especially the extra virgin olive oil. It's a great choice. It's high in the monounsaturated, and it contains those antioxidants that can reduce inflammation. So it's generally recommended as part of a healthy diet. And I know you know as well as I do how great, you know, olive oil is. And
So which ones are good? I mean, I have my opinions, but good in
okay.
nutrients, good in health, the healthiest.
Well, some of the things that we look at is like early harvest of them. So that's made from olives that are picked early in the season, and they tend to have more antioxidants in them. If they're hand picked, that ensures that the olives are selected carefully. They can result in higher quality of oil if they're hand picked. And then the cold pressed extra virgin is the best choice because it's minimally processed and
Yeah,
retains most of the nutrients and antioxidants. Are we on the same page there, Kim?
yeah, completely 100%.
Yeah.
I even take a little bit of a tablespoon, you know, a day before, you know, before my major meals, one in the morning, one, you know, at night, because I was told it really truly helps with better absorption in your body.
Right. And you've seen like people like true labs that change, right?
Oh yeah, my dad actually. So he was, you know, you give my dad as a physician something to do. He is captain compliance, and so he went in. This was in February of I think 2021. Goes in, has a heart cath done. He had an 80+% blockage cleaned out of his LAD, his widowmaker, and another 95% and above cleaned out of his RCA, his right coronary artery. And then within 7 days, he goes for his first COVID vaccine. The next week, he goes for his first pneumonia shot, I think it was. Then he went, it was either pneumonia or shingles. Then the next week, which was 2 weeks later from the vaccine, COVID vaccine, ended up getting the second COVID vaccine shot. And then the next week, you know where this is going. The next week, he ended up with the second either shingles or pneumonia vaccine. Now, his body just was like, holy Moses, what in the world are you doing to me? his body, his immune system was like, which end is up? So he had his inflammation going through the roof. He ended up with fluid around his lungs, his heart, and they were ready to admit him to the hospital. And the doctor said, if he doesn't improve over the weekend, on Monday, we're going to admit him into the hospital. We're going to do a whole battery of tests. And so he was just not happy about anything. So I sent him to our olive oil store in Florida Nueva, which has 3 years running the healthiest olive oil in the world, proven clinically. And I sent him over there to go get the olive oil, which was ordered by his dietitian. His dietitian had said, you need to use this olive oil. And over there, the dietitian also said, now pick up some turmeric extract with curcumin. And I want you to take that every single day and just give it a week. See if you start feeling better. And so he decided to put off going to the hospital. And within 3 weeks, his inflammation, his CRP, ended up literally really, really low. And it was so low and back to normal that his doctor was like, are you serious? I am going to go out and get this olive oil. So ever since then, we've been a believer. So I don't know if it was a placebo. I can't imagine. I don't know if it was literally just the timing and maybe it just dissipated over time because his immune system started dysfunctioning. But the fact that his cardiologist was like, oh my gosh, this is like a miracle. We were like, okay, maybe there's something to it.
Exactly. I like to see the stories with the before and after labs and looking at things. And I have my own personal story with turmeric, not the olive oil, because I didn't know about it then, and lowered my CRP after 3 months after my cardiovascular event.
You too.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Oh, wow. Okay. There's two. But we do have a vascular surgeon, Dr. James Antozana, out of Charlotte, North Carolina, that you can imagine for a vascular surgeon. They're always using their hands. And so, in very intricate ways, especially because he does a lot of minimally invasive procedures, very small, tight movements. And so, he started getting arthritis in his fingers. And I said, why don't you try this olive oil? It clinically reduced my dad's inflammation. So, why not try? He tried it for a couple months and now he actually prescribes it, writes out a prescription for it. I mean, he tells everyone to call this one place, get this olive oil he uses. And he said he sees differences in his patients, or else he wouldn't tell them to order it because he's not about wasting their money because most of the population is on a budget, low income. And he said, if you can prioritize getting this oil, he says, prioritize getting this oil.
exactly. Yeah. So there's certain things in our diet that are good for us. And so, but olive oil, early harvest, hand picked, cold pressed extra virgin for the win.
Exactly. And if you can't remember those, go to Amazon and you can go ahead and do a search for peripheral artery disease, and you'll find our Food for Thought book. And in that book, we have 3 or 4 pages describing exactly how to pick out the right olive oil. It's really descriptive. If you can't afford it, just go ahead and put a comment in the comment section on YouTube or in the chat on Zoom if you're on our Zoom and our live studio audience. And I will go ahead and I will send you a free digital copy so you can have access to that article, or I can send you a PDF of it. So I really believer, number one is this olive oil. And if you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to go to a general store or the dollar store or whatever for it, you have to know that most of that oil is rancid. And I actually believe that that's why Dean Ornish, Dr. Dean Ornish, in his book on reversing heart disease or cardiovascular disease, says you need to stay away from oils if possible. It's because of those everyday oils that you see on the store shelves that are in light bottles. And I think that's the other one I would add, Deidre, is make sure it's in a dark bottle. And that's another indication because you don't want it exposed to light. So it should be in a dark bottle. But most of it on the store shelves it's rancid. You have to make sure there's an actual date, a harvest date, and an expiration date on them as part of your research. So I'm passionate about this.
So much food for thought here.
So much food for thought. Oh, very good. Okay. I want to move forward with this conversation. So olive oil is good. So what else, constitutes, good fats when you're considering a meal and how much we should be consuming each day, and even, per meal, and then, you know, in a full day.
Okay, so your good fats are that monounsaturated olive oil, avocado, and polyunsaturated, which have high omega-3s from fish and flaxseed. You should aim for fats to make up about 20 to 35% of your daily calories, with most coming from the healthier sources, right? So this equates to about 44 to 77 grams of fat per day, and that's in a typical 2,000 calorie diet, and that's spread across your meals. It's not meant for just one meal, and so.
That's pretty cool. What about, we bring up the big controversy, animal fats. Why are people so against animal fats? I see more and more doctors leaning towards a Mediterranean diet, which does include, chicken, and it does include fish. But they're completely against red meat, and completely against, there are some that are completely against all animal fats altogether.
Well, some people avoid animal fats because they're high in the saturated fats, and that can raise the LDL cholesterol and increase your risk for cardiovascular disease. And so definitely want to be talking to your provider, having them look at your numbers. Like, the decision is usually made on like what they're seeing in front of them and you as an individual. However, in moderation, certain kind of animal fats found in fish or grass-fed, grass-finished meats can provide beneficial nutrients like the omega-3s as well. So it's about balance and choosing the higher quality of what we eat and those sources.
Gotcha. Okay, so going back, I'm bouncing all over the place here because this is just, I'm just thinking as we're going, but I want to go back to the oils because we talked about avocado oil, we talked about the coconut oil, we talked about, especially, we love those olive oil, but what about vegetable oils? Because I see both sides on that out there. And is canola oil considered a vegetable oil?
So, yeah, so it's really confusing when it comes to vegetable oils, right? Because the quality, the health effects, and the oils can vary significantly depending on where they're processed, how they're stored, all of that. But with vegetable oil, so it's high in polyunsaturated fats. So those are your sunflower oils, your soybean, your corn oils. And those also include omega-6 fatty acids, right? Which can be heart healthy with the right amount. The problem is you have to have a balance of omega-3s with omega-6. The ratio is what matters for that. So if we in the US have a very omega-6 heavy diet, and so we're not getting the anti-inflammatory properties of the omega-3, which makes the oils in essence not as good for us, right? Because we don't have the proper balance. Low in saturated fat is why people say vegetable oil, right? They're generally low in that, and that's why they're considered a healthier option for cooking. That's why, and they're an inexpensive option, is why a lot of people use vegetable oils too. But when we look at the concerns behind that, processing and refinement, so many of them are on store shelves, have been really highly processed, like you said, refined. It can strip away the nutrients and lead to kind of unhealthy trans fats in those oils. Rancid, you talked about being rancid, where it's exposed to heat or light, or air during storage. So that makes the oil rancid and it can contain harmful free radicals, which contribute to inflammation and increase chronic disease. And that omega-6 ratio, and I want to talk about that here in a little bit about what the ratio is and how to look at that. But then the stability of these oils play a part in that as well. So when
Yeah, I'm just so, I mean, should we, I stay away from any vegetable oils except for olive oil. I only use olive oil, use a little bit of avocado oil, and I'll use that little coconut oil that I talked about. But I literally, is it a good thing that I stay away from vegetable oils?
I think it's a good thing because you really don't know what you're getting when you're pulling something off the store shelf, right? When things aren't stable or they're rancid or they've been had these exposures, they can release harmful compounds in them, and that's why it's not always the best choice for cooking. And olive oil tends to be that better choice, right? It's got the benefits of the omega-3 and
Right. So it has the benefits of the oils, but you know, especially when you know how to, we can control it a little bit better. I just wouldn't know where you can get, you know, a really high quality vegetable oil that would have, you know, you can guarantee has been optimized in a you know in a stable and you know good for you without those harmful things in it.
right, when you're looking at oils and stuff, and we know most of what we hear, the processing with a lot of these really quality olive oils and stuff, like we talk about that processing and it's known from people, but you don't hear that with vegetable oils like you do olive oil.
Mhm.
So,
So let's get back to the ratio, the healthy ratio, omega-3, omega-6. What's that
we'll
good
talk
ratio that
about
we need to
that,
focus
right?
on? And
So the ideal ratio of your omega-3 and your omega-6 for heart health is typically recommended to be 1 to 1 and 1 to 4. And what that means, for every one part of omega-3 you consume, you should consume no more than 4 parts of omega-6. So, and we're kind of the opposite in the US. We contain, like, we get a much higher than that compared to the omega-3s that we do. So, and the ratio is really important because omega-3s are found, you know, in the fish, flaxseed, all of those beneficial anti-inflammatory foods. But omega-6s are found in vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, and they can promote inflammation if it's flipped, like consumed in excess. So the balance is really important, and then it's just a safer way of being able to use those vegetable oils and stuff, and everything in moderation, right?
so what if you're just going to have, let's say, a handful of nuts? Is that going to be harmful, or is that just taking those into consideration, that handful of nuts, in you know, kind of putting that into perspective with your entire day?
Right, you need to think about your entire day and the diet there. So in that day, did you only have nuts, which are omega-6, or did you add some omega-3 healthy oils? And that's why I say we're heavy, even though we're eating healthy, you're eating nuts, they're heavy in omega-6. So we need, like the salmon, we need the olive oils, we need things with omega-3 to balance that out. So that needs to be included in this heart healthy diet, which is very different than our Western, right? Our typical Western diet, the omega-6 omega-3 ratio can even be as high as 15 to 1. So
Wow.
yeah, and we only wanted a 1 to 4. So that's why, you know, we see such an increase of chronic conditions here.
So really the moral of the story though is, I mean, in terms of balance, trying to stay away from the processed foods as much as possible, you're going to be ahead of
Right. You want to stay away from the processed foods, eat fresh foods as much as possible, you know, get the best meats that you can get in your diet. And then you can achieve a healthy ratio of omega-3s by like increasing your omega-3 intake. So those foods like salmon, mackerel, sardines, flaxseed, if you're, vegan, chia seed, walnuts, those are really high in omega-3s. So you really want to focus on making sure you're getting that in the diet, and then just limit, right, those processed foods, such as soybean, corn, sunflower, safflower oils. And then, if you talk to your doctor and you think this ratio is off, it's not a bad idea to supplement with omega-3s in your diet if you're not eating that. And I always say supplementing is meant to be like, you look at your diet that day and you didn't hit the omega-3s, that's the day to supplement, right? But most of the time we should be consuming it through our diet. That's
It's
ideal.
always, yeah, it's always the best way. Except, for me, I have a precursor to macular degeneration, and it's hereditary, and so every day I have a certain amount of omega-3s that I have to supplement. Not only eating fish, we eat fish 4 to 5 times a week, whether it's for lunch or dinner, to add to that. So I try to just boost as much as I can, so I
Right.
can see forever and ever and ever. Amen.
Yeah. And I mean, some of those studies, even on cardiovascular, you're looking at 4 grams of omega-3s a day really is what would benefit. So getting that through food, but most of the time we have to supplement to get the full 4 grams of omega-3s.
Yeah. So I just have one last question, just kind of an overall, so I think that we can help just drive home, the point of why it's so important to actually, choose those good fats as much as possible if you're going to consume fats. And let's talk about why we can't break down some of the so-called bad fats.
Okay, yeah, and that's a question we hear a lot. Like people have this question, and so the trans fats, the indigestibility of that, those refined processed canola oils can result in small amounts of trans fats, which are artificial fats, right? A trans fat is artificial, and the body has difficulty metabolizing that. The trans fats are associated with that higher risk of heart disease, and they can raise the LDL cholesterol, and also lower the good cholesterol. So we're not able to metabolize that or break that down in the way that we should. We also look at the fatty acid composition. So those long chain fatty acids, some critics will argue that the specific structure of the acids in canola oil makes them more challenging for the body to break down. So that's part of that. We hear all the time, you can't break down canola oil, don't use it at all, don't do that. And it's especially when it's consumed in large amounts or when oxidized. And you have to remember, most restaurants that we go to that are cooking with the oil, it is going to be canola. It's a much cheaper oil. You can even ask them that. I do food sensitivity tests all the time, and one of the big things that triggers as a sensitivity is canola oil. And I'm always like, it really kind of goes with that. That it's hard for the body to break down, but there's also not a lot of strong scientific evidence for us to be totally claiming that. So it's one that's kind of on the fence. We hear it a lot, right? It's on the fence. Um,
Hard when you have, certain researchers and organizations that won't acknowledge those sensitivity tests, the food sensitivity tests. And
yeah,
I would imagine that if they did a food sensitivity test across the board, especially for the cardiovascular patients that are already proven to have some sort of inflammation due to whatever reason in their arteries, I think that they would find that there is a problem with canola oil. I'm going to get myself into trouble here, but I'm even, I don't even have cardiovascular disease. I have a sensitivity actually to canola oil. So it's interesting that you asked that. And there are all kinds of these sensitivity tests that you can get. I'm sensitive to a lot of things that were really surprising to me. And the allergist actually told me that one of the reasons, especially some of the vegetables, I have a lot of nightshade allergies, and she said it depends on the pesticides that are used in the ground, you know, for those particular vegetables, which I thought was really interesting. So
Yeah.
we do have a question coming in from Josh, actually a couple of those. What would be a sensitivity reaction to these tests? So for me, I had my sensitivity test where they inject a small reactive dose into my arm, and then it would actually have a bump that would grow over a certain amount of time. So I had an immediate reaction to canola oil, which I thought was interesting. She's like, you know, maybe I shouldn't have given you so much.
Yeah. So it's really hard to pull out sensitivities, Josh. And I say that because some people will feel fatigued or they won't notice it for a while. So a sensitivity can have a reaction up to 3 weeks after we've eaten it. And that's why it's hard to pull out those triggers. And it takes 21 days after we stop eating something for that sensitivity number to reduce by half. And so you don't know till you've not eaten like all the sensitive foods for a while, and then you gradually add back in. And some people will have like clearing of their throat, or they might feel fatigued, or they might have joint pain. So there's so many different symptoms that go along with that sensitivity to something.
And he has no ingestion reaction or long-term fallout. Well, the thing is that you don't know, and that's the thing I think, and this is my own personal opinion, and I think that you align with it as well, Nurse Practitioner Deidre, is that you may not realize that your body is having a reaction to it. You may not realize because you don't often, you know, feel right away the inflammation. Like you don't feel the inflammation in your arteries, right? And the food somehow is absorbed in the arteries. It's just like, you know, people don't know until they have so much sugar in their diet that there's so much that it's been causing damage in the arteries for a long time before they even knew it. That's why you end up with people who, you know, are, let's say, type 2 diabetics, and they say, oh, I was just diagnosed with type 2 diabetes about 2 months ago, and suddenly I'm having cramping in my calves of my legs, and you know, I end up with a wound that won't heal. Well, for a long time before that, that sugar has been wreaking havoc in your arteries, scratching the arteries walls, causing that damage. The plaque's been slowly building up over time. It's not an overnight situation. And so that's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's
We did that
those
episode on
discoveries
insulin resistance too. And
I get.
And that's like a precursor 10 years before the blood sugar even starts to spike high. Things are changing in those arteries, things are changing in the body that we have to be aware of. So,
Yeah, my dad didn't know until he was 78 years old that he had this MTHFR mutation, which made it really difficult for his body to turn food into fuel. And so it was just a slow progression over time that eating gluten, eating enriched foods with folic acid it was actually causing damage to his body because his body wasn't able to break down a very critical enzyme known as homocysteine. So with so much homocysteine in his arteries, it was like nails on his artery walls. And so plaque was slowly building up over time. And that's just how it works. So that's why I went and I got that test, and I've gotten a bunch of other allergy tests so that I can get ahead of it. I want to know what I'm sensitive to ahead of time. And I think that it's better that way.
it is. Yeah, to kind of know. And then we probably should sometime talk about intestinal permeability and leaky gut because that really plays into the food sensitivity and things like how do we get systemic inflammation? And that's a good conversation there for us.
Did you just volunteer something for next week?
I think so.
So I think this is the perfect discussion that leads into that. I want to get to Heinz. Heinz, do you have a question for Nurse Practitioner Deidre? You can go ahead and
I
unmute.
have to figure out how to unmute first. In olive oil, I read someplace that the omega-6 is like 10 times more than omega-3s. Is that true, false, or it depends?
So it does depend. It is a higher in omega-6 than it is omega-3 for that So there is more omega-6. I would have to look up the exact ratio of that though, Heinz, to give you the
I
answer.
see, I'm reading it 10-1 right now.
Okay.
That's pretty high.
That's why I say we're predominantly high in omega-6s. And this comes to the conversation where some people say, don't even do this oil or that. But if you're increasing your omega-3s, we bring that down, right? We bring that ratio down.
Well, sadly, or good for Heinz, I don't do seafood. So I have to find other omega-3s,
Okay.
you know. But yeah, but I just looked that up and I said, what? It has more omega-6 than 3 in olive oil? I didn't know that, you know.
Yeah.
Know if it's in all of the olive oil. See, that's where
That's why I said,
when
does it depend? Because I don't know.
I mean, I was told with the high, that they're just testing general olive oil off the store shelves is what I was told in some of these studies. They're just trying to do what the general public is consuming. But when you actually look at the, Mediterranean diet and the higher end olive oils, the early harvest, hand-picked, cold pressed, extra virgin, the ratio is much better. And so I mean, that's a really good question overall. I wonder if you
is.
could Dr. Google that as well. But when I looked at I don't have it in front of me, but when you go to amphoranueva.com /Marin, and each one of the olive oils has a full breakdown of their different types of fats and antioxidants and things like that. I think I would argue that it's one of those situations that everything in moderation, right? Number one. Number two is, you want to make sure that you consume as many omega-3s as well in your diet, fish and all of that. I think that it's all about the well-balanced diet.
Yeah, and when you're not eating fish, Heinz, think of flaxseed, chia seed. If you could add some of that in to get some good, and then talking to your provider about how much supplementation would be right for you for omega-3 supplementation to kind of balance that out so you get a good ratio and a good omega-3.
I read Consumer Reports every month too. They have a big article, I guess it's September's issue, about the supplements that we take, and one of them was omega-3s. And it has contradictory problems with people on blood thinners when you take the supplements. That's what they wrote. Now, who can answer the true facts on that? But that's what was written in Consumer Reports, this current issue.
Okay. I may have to look at that and then maybe see some good research articles.
Yeah, what was that? I missed it.
Taking omega-3 supplements is not good with blood thinners.
Oh no, yeah, you need to talk to your doctor with omega-3s because it's a blood thinner in and of itself. So when my dad was on his antiplatelets, anticoagulant therapy, they took him off of omegas and off the supplements and off of the turmeric for a while. So it's not something, you got to take a lot of it with a grain of salt, Heinz. Just because Consumer Reports says don't do it, it doesn't mean you don't do it at all. This is something that you need to have the discussion one-on-one with your doctor to determine in your situation, is it right for you? And a lot of times, like for example, with my dad, he's still on the Eliquis, he's still on anticoagulation therapy. He's off the antiplatelet, so he's not on dual at the moment. But so they allowed him to go back on to his omega-3 and his turmeric with curcumin. And they said, watch your arms. Your arms are going to be one of your first indications. If you start getting extra, redness on your arms, showing that you have you have too much blood thinner, you need to get off of those. But it's individualized. I don't want to make a blanket statement that you should never have those supplements, because there are people that are in the network who have cardiovascular disease, who have peripheral artery disease, that are taking those supplements under the guidance of their doctor.
And when you
of
say
their
doctor,
dietitian.
Kim, when you say doctor, is that the cardiologist or is that a different doctor?
That would be your cardiologist, and that would be also in collaboration with your with a dietitian. I would definitely talk to a dietitian. But number 3 is I would talk to your pharmacist, because make sure that it's not necessarily contraindicated, and they can also provide you with critical questions to talk to your doctor about, your cardiologist, as well as other members of your healthcare team, including your dietitian or nutritionist. And it becomes a team effort. But you, as the individual, they can let you know what symptoms to watch for. So if you do think you need additional omega-3s, you can say, hey, pharmacist, hey, doctor, hey, dietitian, we need to figure this out. How can I best get the additional omega-3s in my diet?
Okay. Makes
That
sense.
makes sense?
Yeah.
And in terms of, I was just looking at a study on the extra virgin olive oil, and it's saying great source of antioxidant compounds, vitamin E, oleocanthols. It says it may help prevent heart disease, promote brain function, protect against certain types of cancers as well. It's been studied extensively, and it also talks about, hold on, where'd it go? Let's see. Okay, so it's saturated fat, 14%, monosaturated fat, 73%, polyunsaturated, 11%, lots of vitamin E, lots of vitamin K. Okay, where is the conclusion? Okay, it contains a lot of anti-inflammatory substances. Oh, where did it have? I saw something when I was scrolling through, that it was saying that because of the way in which with polyunsaturated, that it's fine in terms of, like, it was one of those exceptions. It says some people have criticized olive oil for having a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. However, its total amount of polyunsaturated fats is still relatively low. So they say because of that, in this case, it shouldn't be a worry. Would you agree, Deidre?
I do agree with that. Like, if we're looking at oils in general, this is where I tell you to go. But I also do think, like, you have to be mindful of getting omega-3s in as well. And so everything in moderation, just trying to add and get into our diet all of what we need, because we want to decrease inflammation, and that's the goal here. Use the best products and the best things for our body that our body can break down, that doesn't cause this oxidative stress or wreak havoc on our arteries at all.
And then Josh was asking, so high heat and olive oil. There are, especially when you go to amforanueva.com/Marin, they do have, what do you call it? The olive oils that are better for higher heat. They do tend to have less of the antioxidants in them, but you can use them at the higher heat. What do you think? Do you have any suggestions there?
I always do my oils on a lower heat anyways when I cook. I mean, I guess I'm not in a hurry. You know, we start digestion when we start to prep our meals and start to smell it and everything. So I think really what they're thinking about here is like frying foods, you know, and shouldn't we be avoiding that anyways?
Okay, so good. I discovered the air fryer. So you know what I do for that actually is my avocado oil. Because in the spray it has the higher heat, it seems to withstand heat a little bit better. And so I use that, and again, I just spray a little bit on it. And you know, and when I'm actually doing my sauteing, I don't saute. I use a little bit of the avocado spray, but then I add a little bit of bone broth or vegetable broth. And I even save, so when I make my artichokes at the beginning of the week, I go to Trader Joe's and I get a big, thing of 4 artichokes for $3 or $4, $2.99, I think it was. And then I boil them up and then I save that nice vegetable broth out of it that I steamed them in. And then I use that for the rest of the week to saute vegetables and things like that in, to make use of that and use less oil when I'm cooking.
Mhm. That's always a good idea. I actually take all of my vegetables and throw them in a freezer container over and over. And then when the container gets full of just pieces of vegetables, I make a vegetable broth with that. And then pour them into my jars. And then I use that for various different recipes that I need. So similar to what you do, I just kind of, if I'm chopping something, it goes in the bag, it goes in the freezer when I'm ready to, have the time in my life. I make up more.
I wanted to get to Douglas. Douglas, did you have a question for Deidre? I know you had one earlier, so I want to make sure to be mindful of your engagement and your interest in asking Deidre a question. If you want to go ahead and unmute, or I can search back to see what that question was in comments. It looks like you might have walked away. I just want to double check to see what that question might have been. And I think it was more on the labels of, on the processed foods. What are the labels? What should you be looking for in terms of fat?
Okay, we probably should do a segment on reading the
Yeah,
label.
that's what I'm
Like
thinking is
really,
we need a full segment on reading the label. Because I know on labels they have monosaturated, they have polyunsaturated, and then they have trans fats, right? I
yeah,
think those are the three that they have on there. And of course, limiting the trans fats, trying to get that to nothing. And then
right,
I would say minimally the saturated, but polyunsaturated and mono.
right. So, I think we should do a label, like go through the label and everything, but let's, just for the purpose of this, to like simplify in our mind, the trans fats, let's, if we can do that to 0, that's a start.
Okay. That's a good start. I think that is the best thing. Just see when you have your label, just make sure we're going to stop there and we're going to just say that is a great moral of the story. If you do need to consume processed foods, just make sure you got to get rid of those trans fats. Let's try and make that step number one. And then we're going to continue over every single week. We're going to have a new topic. Next week, we're going to be talking about your leaky gut. It's something that Deidre has been trying to get me to do a test on, and I still have yet to send in the test because we'll talk about what that test is, and then you'll understand why I'm waiting and why I'm procrastinating on getting that test. And at some point when I do get up courage to take that test, we will do an entire segment about my gut. So we use my gut as an example, but next week, I think what we'll do is we'll do an overview of the leaky gut and how that can actually affect ultimately the inflammation in your arteries. So with that, I think that we'll end it here on fats. I think we got a good overview. I think we could do an entire show on every single one of them. So, if you just feel like we scraped the surface, we really did just scrape the surface on it because we only have a short amount of time. But over time, Deidre's here with us every single week. She is graciously donated her time. You can go to desirewellnessgroup.com to find out more information about Nurse Practitioner Deidre, as well as her practice. She does take a holistic approach to health, and she does her best each week to come here and answer your questions. So make sure to join us every single week, and especially next week, same bad time, same bad channel, right? Right here at youtube.com/the way to my heart. Have a great day, everyone.
See you later.